Hey guys, it's Matthew here, and I am talking about Swords episodes 21 through 30 on today's Sword Comic Secrets. So this first episode is the second episode with Stroller in it. It's the first time we're encountering a pirate in the series, I believe. It's quite a graphic episode, admittedly. The first version of this comic didn't have the pirate's upper half lying on the ground, so a lot of people got very confused and thought that in the last panel the character was suddenly eating a steak dinner at a table. Um, I don't know how they reached that conclusion, but just to make it more clear that the pirate got cut in half, I added his top half on the ground, and that seemed to do the trick. The next episode is The Long Sword of Time. It's a very straightforward joke. I didn't actually want to get into doing time travel stories when I started this comic. I thought that's too much, too many things that can go wrong there. But admittedly, since then, time travel has become a pretty core component of some of the deeper lore of the series. And I suppose if you think about it now, there are three distinct timelines based on time travelers going back and changing something. This is the introduction of one of the demon swords. I think this is the first demon sword we see. He is the main demon sword as well. This was always intended to be the Demon King. You can see from the crown and the storyline being that he takes over somebody's body, that this is firmly set before episode 4, where the Demon King has taken on a more powerful host. So basically, a goblin is convinced by this demon sword to eat the demon sword, and he becomes the Demon King. And that sets up most of the events going forward. This is just a sort of, random episode set in a faraway samurai type land. That samurai land is called Katana, just to be confusing. Something that happened later that I didn't realize was that Katana was actually also the name that I'd given to a fantasy setting from a story I did when I was a teenager. And I figured that out when I went and dug up the old drawings that I'd done of that world. So I guess some habits die hard. But basically, this is about some lore of the Swordscomic universe, which is that whenever a sword turns 100 years old, it gains a soul. And that's based on a piece of Japanese folklore, so you don't have to ask me if you want to steal it. This is the introduction of the Bright Knight and the Night Knight. In this comic, he is referred to as Dark Knight, but Dark Knights later went on to mean all of the characters who come from that region of the world who wear sort of purple and worship a six-eyed Kargob. So I really need to fix this episode. But basically, the guy in purple is the Night Knight, and that's different from Brad Knight, who's a different character, and also the Good Knight, who's another different character. But Night Knight, the Dark Knight, is that name. And basically, these two 14 years ago gave each other a scar on the face. They're re-meeting in battle now, and they decide to put down their swords and, be happy together. So this episode is a continuation of, I want to say, episode 5, where the armies of Hiltshire and the armies of the Badlands clashed. Basically, the barbarians have retreated from battle, and they've gone back home to the Badlands. And so now the tournament can continue. And then King Xiphos, who is the leader of the barbarians from the Badlands, sneaks in and basically he tells the guy at the stall that he's not a barbarian but a bartender, which isn't really a joke that comes up too much later on. I really should have played that up more, had people asking him to, make drinks or whatever. That joke just kind of fell by the wayside a bit. And you can see he's stolen some clothes because they don't fit him very well and his pants are ripping apart. Yeah, basically he sneaks into the tournament. This is the episode where Harp is sort of developed a bit more. She like I mentioned in the last video, was always intended to be a sort of brave knight character. That's set up from her first introduction in episode 8 and expanded upon in episode 20 when she kind of goes off on her own. So here she is meeting with the lake monster, which, is another character who's shown up before. Basically, the lake monster tries to trick her so it can eat her, and then ends up making her a knight instead. This is the introduction of the Fungen. Turns out there are a lot of other series that use the joke the Fungen, including Crossing Swords and Adventure Time and probably a few others. The Fungen's, a pretty strong staple of the series now. It shows up a lot of times. So it's kind of low-hanging fruit, I guess is what I'm trying to say, in that a lot of other people have done it as well. But that's okay, it's fun, and this sort of intersects with a sort of Guts-inspired character, Entrails the Dark Knight. And he's sort of the hero of the Dark Knight. He's the real grizzly veteran type character who's been around the block a few times. And on his way to the tournament, he decides to go on this low-level dungeon and ends up getting quite badly maimed in the process. In this episode, a mad scientist who only recently got a name because he's in our card game, Swords Cut the Deck, Dr. Fullerstein, he creates a sword golem. I did not enjoy drawing that sword golem. It took a long time for what is essentially a pretty basic joke. But it's fun. It's alright. I'll live. And his assistant is called Uggo, and as you can see, he's kind of half a baby and half a grown man stitched together in a horrible fashion. They show up a few times. There's often a lot of body horror with these two characters. As a bit of trivia, they live next to the Spookwood, which is the forest where the two Wraith characters come from, who show up later in the series. He's just kind of he's a bit character, going with all those kind of usual cliches. And a lot of people say he looks like Sephiroth, but that's really just his color scheme, and it wasn't intentional. And then episode 30, it was impossible not to do a erotic joke, being the episode Triple X. For some reason, the Blade Master got a shirt. I think it's just because if he'd been shirtless, he would have looked naked in all of these shots. So I gave him a shirt. The stitches on his shirt say 12 because he's originally from episode 12. I think that's the joke. That's the secret joke anyway. And the rest of it's just pretty straightforward. So that's about it for today's Swordscomic Secrets. Nothing too deep to go in on today. But thanks again for watching, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.